time I worked with you guys, we did it at your place, right?
Yeah. So this is our first annual, hopefully, we say annual, our first annual government IT sales summit. So,
Okay.
sort of an exciting new venue for us. I think a lot of good content and then
Well,
a great turnout.
if you had, I think Kirsten, and I got to apologize to her because I misspelled her name going back. Well, iPhone spell checker returned it to Kristen instead of Kirsten.
Yeah.
But, there's 800 people registered, or I think
Over 960.
900. So, that's a significant buy-in. How many of them are all of those people channel partners already with you guys?
They're partners. So we look at the VAR community solutions providers as partners. We have clients, which is your technology OEMs, and then the systems integrators. That's really all that it is. The government folks in attendance are the speakers.
So what do they have, about 4 sessions going on right now, I guess? Is that the 3? Oh, okay.
So I don't have that problem anymore.
I saw there was a...
I think we're going to go ahead and get started here in just a second. So if everybody get their seats.
Yeah.
Lloyd.
I've got to talk to you.
Yeah.
That other optimizing one with Frank and Richard would,
Perfect.
That would be a really, really good one.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, so we're doing...
I interviewed with Richard last night.
Oh, did you? Oh, okay. Yeah.
Stephanie, she left. She moved to Boston.
Yeah.
Yeah, she
Okay.
moved to Boston.
That's interesting.
I told you.
Yep.
I told you.
Yep. All right, everyone, if you could take your seats, we'll probably get started here. We're just a little bit past the 2:15 mark. So you've probably sat through a lot of sessions today, but I've got to go through the housekeeping notes here. This session's being video recorded and will be available on demand to all attendees. Video recorded sessions may be used for promotional purposes. Please, during the Q&A session, please wait for a microphone to ask your questions so that when we do have the video, we do have the on-demand. There's not just a pause before a random answer. That'd be fantastic. So I think we've got a great panel planned for you today. My name's Chris Wilkinson. I'm the Senior Director of Market Development for Immix Group. I'd like to really start the panel off today by thanking the panel for participating in our session. Also like to provide the framework that I plan to use for what we've prepared today. Rather than recite each panel member's bio, I'd like to start by giving each of the panelists 3 to 5 minutes to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about what they'd like to talk to us today. Then I plan to set the stage for our conversation, really reviewing some of the programs that you heard in the market intelligence briefings today, the IT consolidation, the IT optimization efforts in FY15, and then I want to touch upon what industry might expect to see in FY15 aligned to those strategic initiatives. From there, we'll then turn to the panel for perspective. I've brought some prepared questions that we'll run through today, but then I'd also like to get some perspective from the panel on some of the questions that you may have out in the audience. Finally, we'll conclude with some comments looking forward at what we might expect to see in the coming years. So with that, really before I turn it over to the panel, we have about an hour session planned for you today. Again, we started just a few minutes late here, so we'll try and catch back up. But while I go down the line, I'm going to try and hold the panelists to that 3 to 5 minute threshold. That way we can ensure that we have time for the audience to interact and take advantage of the esteemed panel that we've prepared for you today. So, to my left, I've got Mr. Scott Jack. I'm excited to get Scott's perspective on all of this from a recently retired government official with more than 40 years of experience, including some time spent in a number of roles at 2 of the military service components, the United States Air Force, the United States Marine Corps, as well as time spent directly working for the Department of Defense. Scott has years of experience in multiple disciplines ranging from military aircraft operations to information management and cybersecurity. So Scott, maybe you could start us off by telling a little bit about yourself, what you're doing now, and what you'd like to touch upon today.
So, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us here, and thanks, Chris, for putting together a great team for the panel with Bill and Henry and I. I'm excited to do this. When I stepped away from the government, it was time for me to go. There were younger people like yourselves out there in the audience that needed an opportunity to put their English on the ball, and where the federal government, the Department of Defense in particular, there were some sharp upwardly mobile, very competent junior leaders that needed to have the opportunity to step up into that leadership threshold and pick up the ball and keep running. And so what I've done in my post-government, albeit a short amount of time, is I've tried to become what I would call a senior mentor, both to those folks in government. I have a portfolio of about 55 to 60 young federal employees across the spectrum of the workforce that I mentor on a personal basis. And then I'm working in my private consulting company that is a one-man shop myself, is a mentor to small, medium, and in some cases large-size companies on how to navigate the shoals of the current business environment with sequestration, lowest price, technically acceptable. And I'm going to offer up some opinions and behavior patterns and observations to you all today with regard to that, on how maybe to change the landscape and kind of follow on some of the conversations that one of the speakers at the morning session, I think it was Anthony Robbins, mentioned about, we're all stewards of the taxpayers' money. Whether you're a provider out there in the IT world, or you're a government official like I was in most of my adult life, or as a consultant today advising you on how best to do your capture of that lucrative market. So with that, I'll offer up some of my opinions later on in the discussion about cybersecurity and the contraction of the attack surface that is happening as a result of such things as GIE and the like. So I'll turn it over to my esteemed colleagues, Bill.
Excellent. So next we have Mr. Bill Brom. Interested perspective from Bill's years of experience managing large IT programs both in the public and the private sector, working in an executive business development capacity at Sprint, and as the Vice Director, Network Services for the Defense Information Systems Agency, DISA. Mr. Brom's also a retired U.S. Army officer. So, Bill, if you could introduce yourself and talk about what you'd like to talk about.
Okay, thanks very much. I appreciate that. And I got it backwards. I kind of did the military, then a whole bunch of civilian, and then I came back to government. So perhaps a little different career than some folks. Currently doing some consulting and, kind of similar to Scott in that regard. Probably do more along the lines of strategic. And even today, what I'm going to bring to the table here and talk a little bit about is the DoD Cloud Way Forward. I hope everybody's had a chance to see this. I'm sure many of you have. But it just came out about a week ago. It's dated July 23rd, but was just now approved for public release. And I think this is a document we've been waiting for some time as to how things are going to go forward. I think it's going to drive a lot of things in terms of what we do on a day-to-day basis in terms of the whole selling process. I think we're going to see some significant changes potentially in how we do this. If you follow the DoD, if you follow DISA, if you follow the services, some ways a lot of folks are aligned. Most of my clients, when I talk to them, they have kind of the traditional. They've got the account manager focused on Army. They've got the account manager focused on DISA. Well, guess what? The requirements are going to start with Army, and then they're going to flow over to DISA for satisfaction, and we're going to have a whole challenge there. So while all of the cybersecurity aspects of this is obviously critical, but if we don't win business, then we don't even have to worry about cybersecurity, right? So along with those things and along with that alignment is a different customer set also. I've heard recently a couple of CIOs from the government talk about their internal sell is also a challenge because they're now working with people who previously, they ran these things themselves. They control that data. They own that data. And it's sitting in data centers that they manage. And in DoD, about 2,500 of them. Now, some of those are that little server that the previous speaker talked about in one room, which may morph into something else. But for a lot of these folks, the fact that John down the hall has that server under his desk and is running this capability, when they start counting them, from the perspective of DoD, it took them a while to learn That's what some of these data centers we were talking about. And so when you close them, it's, well, big deal. You just took a server out. On the other hand, there's some other ones, Radford and some other ones in the Army. They're very big data centers. They're huge data centers. And so how do you consolidate that into the bigger picture? So there's a comfort level, though, if I'm talking within DOD and I'm talking to, internally, well, folks may have challenges with DISA. At the end of the day, DISA is still part of the family. And so that comfort level in terms of having DISA manage some of this stuff is more than it might be in a commercial. I know if I asked everybody in this room that's in that space, I'm pretty sure everybody would say, hey, we can handle this data. We can put this into our center. We can do just as good as you can, DISA, in terms of controlling it. But it's a cultural issue. And I think that's one of the things that we have to recognize, that there's a lot of cultural issues that we have to overcome. We have to be able to be responsive to them in that regard.
Very good. And towards the end down there, we have Mr. Henry Stankiewicz. Again, good perspective from Henry, given his experience just a few years removed from serving as the CIO and then the Vice Chief Information Assurance Executive as a member of the SES, the Senior Executive Services, assigned to DISA, the Defense Information Systems Agency. Among other responsibilities, Henry served as the designated approving authority for 3 years at the agency. Henry's also a published author and a retired Army Reserve Lieutenant Colonel, where he served our nation from 1996 to 2008. Henry, if you want to wrap up some comments.
Okay, so first of all, again, I'm going to echo what my fellow colleagues here said, and that's thank you very much, because I'm looking at some of the other panels that are teed up, and listening to Frank and Richard in one of the other venues, Chris, would have been really good, because those guys are exceptionally smart and they know what the heck they're talking about. I think I've been very lucky on this whole career arc. We sort of did a brief recap, and I think some of you know me from my days at DISA and the CIO job, as well as being the DAA. And the DISA DAA has a very unique role in this world. I mean, the accreditation boundary is the NIPRNet, the CIPRNet. About a third of the TS fabric, the satellites, the computing facilities, the White House Communications Agency, the Nuclear Command and Control, and so as well as the mobility and a few other things. And so I think I look at cybersecurity and this analysis of what risk really is, maybe from a little bit of a different perspective than some of you in the room. But the thing is, that perspective is the perspective you need to be selling into, because quite frankly, it's a perspective that is being cascaded across the entire whole of government. I'm seeing Dave McClure out in the audience right now, and I've already told him to shush. He doesn't get to ask any questions. Because you look at what those things that happen inside that FedRAMP GSA world, and they're absolutely amazing, and you recognize that inside the DoD environment, the DISA FSO has team members right there with the FedRAMP team, and some of those new guidance things that are coming out in the FedRAMP world are very much derived from the DISA FSO STIG writing team. And so when you start looking at what is going to happen in the FedRAMP world, I would posit at some point in time, for all of you who are selling, you're going to actually have to make sure you get through that compliancy, because that compliancy isn't just going to last for the civilian agencies, but I would posit at least at the medium level, it will go across DoD and the IC. My other perspective is I spent many years on the commercial side. I was a CIO in the airline industry for about 6 years, and I did my own startup. And obviously, as Chris was so kind to give me a shout out, I'm working on my third book, so I'm really kind of excited and very much focused on that. And if you want to hear my current obsession, it's actually on this visualization of understanding what your cyber environment is, because you talk with people like the Marine Corps DAA Ray Latier, or you talk to the Stratcom DAA, or some of the other authorizing officials, as they're now called. And the question always becomes, what is the context? And so as you're looking at these solution sets and you're trying to put them up inside either the department, the IC, or the rest of the whole of government, the question is, what is the white space that your solution set is really going to be able to drive value on, either value, return on investment, or return on value? I mean, however you want to try to do that qualification. And I think when you start doing that, you want to start looking at what I would characterize as that whole cybersecurity analytics chain, and looking again across that portfolio, because there's no solution set out there. And I mean, I've looked at most of them. There's no solution set out there that will cover down on all of them. But for the vendors in the room, the OEMs, you've got the ability to go there and say, how does this fit inside that portfolio to sell into either DoD, IC, or CDM? And for the other SIs, the question is, what is your value-added proposition? Again, return on investment or return on value analysis on being able to go and deliver those offerings. So.
Well, thank you each for those perspectives. I think a lot of what we talked about there is going to lead into some of the questions that I had planned for the panel today. But I do want to encourage the audience to be thinking of questions, again, to take advantage of the opportunity I have here. I'll try and pause at a couple different points throughout the presentation. I'd also like to take a moment to thank you each for your service. We appreciate the time that you served with the nation. Certainly something that's very important to me, so I wanted to take a moment to thank you for that. To set the stage for the discussion today, I'm not sure who in the audience may have been able to attend the briefings this morning, but I want to go into a little bit more detail into some of the major FY15 programs and initiatives that are around the topic of the panel session today. FY15 is going to be a really busy year for IT optimization and IT consolidation, especially for the Defense Information Systems Agency, again, DISA. First, DISA is standing up the Joint Force Headquarters, JFHQ, which will serve as the execution command for the U.S. Cyber Command. In doing this, DISA is going to absorb a significant amount of the Department of Defense's DoD defensive cyber operations workload, and it's going to play a supporting role to the U.S. Cybercom actually operating on the DoDIN, the Defense Information Network. What this means is that if JFQ sees a threat or a vulnerability on the DoDIN, JFHQ will have the ability to turn off, say, a port or an application as deemed necessary to defend the network, even if that port or application belongs to another DoD component. For the audience out there, you can expect to see RFIs in the next quarter as DIS is going to seek to build up this capability. You could expect to also kick off next year with an RFI for a vendor-agnostic replacement of DIS's HBSS, DIS's host-based security system. HBSS is DoD's commercial off-the-shelf standardized suite of technologies that monitors, detects, and counters against known cyber threats to the Department of Defense. FY15 will also see more work on the JRSS, the Joint Regional Cybersecurity Stacks program. I know there was a lot of talk about that this morning. DIS is going to continue their efforts with the military services to consolidate security stacks to enhance visibility, what Henry was talking about, looking at producing new ways to be able to view this information, not only from a visual standpoint to be able to make sense of the data, but also to be able to see across the network, see beyond just these little sort of fiefdoms that we have established today. You're also going to see construction of new enterprise operations centers. That's to improve regional cyber capabilities and regional situational awareness, again, that will feed into the broader network architecture. The EOC combined with JRSS will make it easier for the network operators in DISA and the services to observe activity across the DoDIN. Again, just like I mentioned a moment ago. I think more importantly, JRSS and EOC are also key parts of the Joint Information Environment, the JIE concept. JIE is probably the largest modernization effort the DoD's ever undertaken, and it represents a consolidation concept where DoD would share a single IT platform for all of the services that would be run by DISA that would be leveraged for all DoD missions. JIE is intended to enhance data access, information sharing, and to make the DoD more secure, more agile, at a lower cost, while also modernizing DoD's IT infrastructure. So I think it goes without saying this is going to be very busy. I'd say lastly, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program, CDM. CDM represents another government consolidation effort which seeks to enable better cybersecurity risk management strategies in defense of our nation's .gov domains and our nation's critical infrastructure. Now, the panel today here may touch upon CDM just very briefly, but I want to note that the following session here at the summit is devoted to the topic. So again, we'll probably spend most of our time here discussing some of those DISA initiatives on top of some of the other topics that the panel would like to communicate. And for those of you that want to hang around, I'll actually be moderating the CDM panel in the next session. That's a bit of a warning in case you want to run for the exits, by the way. So with that background, I'd really like to turn to our panel for some perspective. The title of this panel session centers around the hidden risk in IT consolidation. I really want to address this from two fronts. First, an obvious advantage of the consolidation and optimization efforts in the opening remarks provide a benefit in the fact that we're reducing the attack surface for our overall DoD networks. but that reduced attack surface results in more concentrated, more target-rich attack vectors. So I'd like to ask the panel, given many of our agencies are often admitting that our enemies may already be on our networks today, what's our government doing, or how can industry and the audience help to increase the defense of these higher value targets? And Henry, I think I'll start down there on your end.
Well, thanks. So I think when we look at this whole notion of data center consolidations, especially inside the department, I'm just going to kind of frame it with inside the Defense Department. I think we recognize that some of this stuff has happened before. For those of us in the room who are old enough and they remember those first rounds of BRAC's, Base Realignment and Closure Commissions, and the consolidation efforts there, and for those heavily inside the IT environment during the Bush 41 administration with what were called DMRDs, Defense Management Resource Decisions, specifically 918 and 924, which stood up DISA, the transformation from DCA to DISA, and the consolidation of about 198 data centers into the 14 and then downsized to whatever that final nuggled out number is going to be. I think you've seen some of these activities happening. Additionally, you've seen some of the other modernizations, and I think I'll let Bill talk about Gig BE and the bandwidth expansion on how do you expand this as you start trying to deal with networks, net-centric services or mobility services. The problem with some of these consolidations is not that they're just a target-rich environment. The problem is also it's a very homogeneous environment. And so if you look at the different attack surfaces and the attack planes, at times when you have standardized TTPs, tactics, techniques, procedures, what you end up having in there is the exact same threat vectors going all the way through the environment. So if you're looking at things like advanced persistent threats, APTs, or man-in-the-middle attacks, or some of these other things that you keep hearing about, the question becomes, how do you actually model and recognize what these attack vectors look like? And that becomes an interesting mental chess game. I think as we've rolled out things like the whole cyber protection teams, the CPTs under Cybercom, you're able to start seeing the deployment of force structures out into the deployed forces as well as into the other service agencies and their command centers of people who are very well versed. Love them, hate them, whatever your opinion of NSA is. NSA has some of the best people who truly understand how computers work and how networks work in the world. And what we're starting to see is the application of that incredible amount of institutional knowledge back out into the force structure. So for all of you on sort of whatever side of this equation you are, where you're looking at things like how do I provide training for the training providers? I mean, CPTs and role-based training is a fascinating place and lots of opportunities there. Going and understanding how to communicate threat vectors and do in that cyber analytics chain, as I alluded to recognize, report, remediate, and making that faster and easier are all great things. I think there's going to be a vast shift under continuing risk monitoring, sort of the policy side of CDM, where you're moving away from a pure FISMA compliancy. And for some of the in the audience heard me kind of ranting and raving on this yesterday. I mean, FISMA is great. You got to get the A on the report card because all it does is it keeps people quiet and it reduces the noise stuff. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually any more secure or any safer. Sorry, I just heard someone chuckle, and I mean, whoever chuckled, I'm sorry, I agree with you. I mean, just because you get an A on your FISMA report card doesn't mean that you're necessarily any more secure, because what happens is the very next minute it may have changed. And the question is, how does CDM, how does risk management frameworks, how does FedRAMP, how does all these other cloud offerings make it safer in this new risk world? Because the risk profiles have changed dramatically. You look at it and you say, okay, gosh darn it all, I've got these mobile phones and they've got a whole bunch of stuff in there. But then we get the wearables. Then we get the embeds, we get the SCADAs or the industrial control systems, which are also threat vectors. I don't want to ask how many of you have a Nest thermostat in your houses, but I mean I've got a lot of friends who have them, and they're a potential threat vector. Sorry, I mean, they're just another IP-enabled device that allows access to communications. And so
Henry,
it's
I
going to be
just
fun.
got a text from my refrigerator. I need to pick up milk on my way home.
And I'm
You're out of
done.
eggs. So I think the part that you, I was going to say out of eggs, right? Isn't that the new thing that's going in refrigerators?
If it's Scott, it's beer.
We might be onto something. Let's.
It's great to
trademark
be
that.
retired.
So one of the interesting things that I think you talked about there that we might hit on a little bit more in the CDM session is definitely the impact of FISMA and to be able to evolve to truly validating or certifying security of the networks. We did a session on enterprise mobility at Imix Group a few weeks ago where the governing board of broadcasters had an executive that was, recently joined government from the commercial side of the house and told, I thought it was a really funny story and a really sad story about the state of our affairs in the sense that they had just received not great FISMA scores, but pretty good FISMA scores, and he was actually receiving accolades when he knew that, and he used the number 18, I don't know if it was actually 18 or if he was telling a story, but he was receiving accolades for his FISMA score, and 18 of his servers were completely owned by China. So again, something's wrong there, right? We've got to continue to progress these different certifications and accreditations. Before I move on to the next question, I'd ask Bill or Scott if you have any additional input in regards to this increased risk, especially as we take a look at staffing to be able to support these capabilities and understanding that there is that sort of talent gap as we're looking at some of these things as well.
Well, I think one thing I would add is I commented earlier about the fact that a lot of what we have so-called data centers and real data centers that exist out there, and a certain cultural issues. But then let's talk about whether or not they're really secure. And quite honestly, I think we're finding out. I think they know a heck of a lot of these are just porous. I mean, these people. A lot of folks have established these things as almost ad hoc capabilities, and they're not within the security network. And so I think to some extent, reducing or increasing the amount of surfaces, that's probably an important issue. But even more important is going to be how we ensure that those that we go to are secure. Henry mentioned the BRAC, and so we know that consolidation is not new. And those of you who are in the military, you know that they've been bracking for years. But what you also know beyond that is if DoD had its way, we would have one heck of a lot less military facilities in the United States. And there's a real easy reason why we don't, and that's all tied to politics. I mean, it's, bases are in places, and, I think there might be one state or something, maybe Oregon, that doesn't have a base, but that's about it. I mean, frankly, bases are created for economic development and things like that. That's going to continue. One of the things that you notice in the document that I referred to a few minutes ago about the OSD cloud, it clearly mentions the capability of putting these things in commercial facilities. DoD knows they need to do that. First of all, DoD needs industry, and we are all we work together. The organization that Cindy Moran and I managed here for a few years, went to her retirement today, by the way. Within that organization, there was 800 and plus government employees, but then we had about 1,500 contractors. So there's a lot of contractors that we're working in. So that is an integral part of the organization, and I don't see any change to that. I do not see that the government and the constrained environment they have right now suddenly getting a flood more money to build lots of new data centers because of attack services. First of all, even trying to explain that on the Hill becomes complicated. And the reality is that I think industry is completely capable of doing this. I mean, there's no reason why. And it's really a question of what part of the capabilities are going to go into commercial data centers and how you're going to protect those within the boundaries, And the capability is there. We all know the capability is there. I think the question, though, becomes how do we work together? Frequently, when I speak with people, their alignment. One of the things I always tell my clients is that when you're talking to the government, they don't think like you. They flat out don't think like you do. I mean, when they get up in the morning, there's a mission-oriented aspect that, and don't anybody take this that I'm trying to say that industry is not mission-oriented. But anybody that has ever worked in BD knows that as soon as you take anything into your management, one of the first questions is what? Are we going to make any money on this, right? So if you don't have that bottom line drive, but those of you who know Larry Huffman up at DISA, you know that Larry Huffman is a 100% operator. That managing the DODM is what Larry Huffman does every single day of his life. And he never came to me, never, ever walked into the office, or reverse that, I never walked into his office because he didn't come to my office. I never walked in his office and he didn't say, Bill, can we afford this? He says, Bill, when are you going to have it done? Because it was our job to go figure it out with the resources we have. So I think we have to recognize that cultural aspects of that, and we have to make sure that we ask the right questions.
Perfect. Scott, anything you'd like to add?
So one of the things that I think we have to grapple with, first and foremost, is the citizens of our country expect our government to be ruthlessly efficient in peacetime and ruthlessly efficient when we're in combat, and effective. The effectiveness in combat is what keeps our nation a sovereign entity in this globalized world that we live in. One of my senior mentors many years ago, when we were struggling with what the heck do we call this thing called the network, the enterprise, General Hawley, commander of Air Combat Command, he had a principle about leadership and command and control that I think permeates the military, and it's been my experience. The model that a typical military officer deals with is you cannot command what you don't control. So centralization, consolidation that erodes their perception of their ability to command and control is going to be something that is not going to be warmly embraced unless it's absolutely proven to what Bill said about mission assurance, okay? So the challenge there is we have to be able to, you all have to be able to deliver a business value that is framed around a commander's ability to achieve mission assurance in whatever environment that may presuppose that it would occur. Consolidation brings about something that we deal with on the periphery, and that is a system of systems where a risk assumed by one is shared by everybody. Okay? So the back door that gets exploited, whether it's Target's HVAC system and its SCADA network that resulted in hundreds of thousands of people's credit information being exposed, or Home Depot, who found that they had a blind spot in their point of sale system that resulted in my third debit card issuance from USAA in 3 months, or a government agency who just shut down their unclassified email. It doesn't matter because there is someone out there trying to do something, dirty deeds done dirt cheap, just because they can. So be mindful of that. The struggle that I think that our government CIOs and their net ops, net D folks have is trying to understand and know thyself and be able to describe what is normal in their environment so that they can declutter their sensors, array and cue them to the anomalies and the anomalous behavior both from an inside perspective as well as an external perspective, and prosecute those anomalies in a successful and effective and efficient manner. So the challenge, therein lies the challenge. And bringing together a market basket of capability, knowledge, skills, and abilities is what you all have to be thinking of first and foremost, and at an affordable cost.
So I think when you say systems of systems, a risk to one is a risk to all, I wonder how long it's going to take us to get to the gap where, or to bridge the gap where standardization and standards, best practices that could be developed across the systems will be, or across the systems, would be adequate. The JIE published or DISA published a JIE document on, I think it was May 5th, 2014. I thought it had a great analogy that talks to that in the sense that it equates our military networks as to taking a road trip across the United States. Let's say it's from Washington, D.C. to California, but at every state border, you have to get a different driver's license. And in some states, they might drive on the left side of the road. In the other states, they might drive on the right side of the road. And in some states, they don't allow Mercedes to drive. They only allow BMWs to drive, right? That was, I thought, a great analogy to the way we're trying to operate today and the warfighter's challenge in being able to communicate and accomplish their mission. So I think it makes sense as we ask the question about this consolidation, this optimization. What I think we talked about here is, getting to that standardization where we do have standards and best practices that can truly defend the networks. I think getting to that is going to be very fascinating to see how we get there. I think the audience could certainly help us do that. The second front from which I'd like to come at the title, again, hidden risk in IT consolidation, touches upon the implications of these initiatives for many in the audience. You hear terms like consolidation, standardization, enterprise buy. That often translates for all of us in the sales environment into bigger purchases, much larger procurements, but it also means fewer contracts, right? Again, in other words, you're looking at the IT manufacturers or the OEMs or the partners in the audience where there may be very few winners and there may be a lot of losers. So I think, Henry, if I'm not mistaken, when you started out some of your remarks, you talked about how we really need to make sure that our message meets the requirements of these different I should say meet the requirements of our government agencies to help them accomplish their mission. What advice might you have? And maybe I'll start with Scott here based on the prep call we had. What advice might you have for our audience to ensure that their technologies is considered for these enterprise procurements?
So the challenge that you have is to have someone in your staff that can vocalize and communicate the knowledge, skills, competencies, or the product differentiation that your company brings to bear. And if you're a small to medium-sized company, you need to establish a channel partnership and a trust relationship with those system integrators such that they can advocate for your particular brand as equally well as you do. And that is from my perspective and what I've seen is too often when I was in government, I would have a systems integrator come in and looking at one of our requirements, you pick whatever requirement it was, and especially if it was a large enterprise deployment, they would come in with very macro level kinds of verbalization of what they were going to do. And typically, it was almost like they gleaned a marketing sheet. And once you peeled back and started asking the pesky questions of, okay, so I have a heterogeneity problem of multiple variations of an operating system. How is your sensor going to help me reduce the churn that I have to go through? Or if I have that same heterogeneity, and I need to rationalize a whole portfolio of applications so that I can reduce the cycle time to deploying a patch or a system update across an enterprise the size of the United States Air Force, the United States Marine Corps, or the DoD in its entirety, if we fully realize what JAE looks like. If you bring a niche market capability, make sure that that system integrator that you're partnered with can really bring to bear the true competency and capability of the product, service, or application that you're delivering.
So, Henry, maybe I'll shift to you, given some of the comments that you made in the opening. And I think it actually gets me to another point where we want to make sure everybody in the audience understands what JIE is, right? What it is and what it isn't. JIE is a concept or an initiative. It's not a program. So, Henry, along those same lines, how can the audience stay in front of these requirements when some of these programs and some of the dollars that may fund this initiative that we call JIE may not very neatly tie to an Exhibit 53 or 300 budgeted line item?
Oh boy, and a lot of them don't. I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, if you start going through Exhibit 300s, and for all of you who are on sort of that sell side of the government, I mean, that is actually, they target a target-rich environment for you to figure out where the money is actually inside these organizations. So I mean, at times, I kind of preach the idea that Exhibit 300 is a beautiful, beautiful hunting ground. So JIE itself, I mean, what a great conceptual architecture and the ability to make it all move together. And the question is really going to be for the department as a whole, I mean, are you going to have the wherewithal to force that standardization in some manner, shape, or form across all of the services and components? And I think that standardization really turns into a question of interoperability, because there are going to be different form factors, be they, as I said earlier, for wearables or mobiles or embeds, or a different weapon system that really does require a unique set of skills. I mean, I think we all read today about the Warthog and whether or not it's the right tool at the right time, and it depends on who you talk to if it is or not. And I think Scott, obviously with the Marine Corps and the Expeditionary Forces, has a whole very, very strong series of opinions on what the right form factors are for any of this delivery. So a few things in here, though. Recognize that those BPAs are not APLs. So a blanket purchase agreement is not an approved products list. It's an easier way to purchase a product, but just because your product isn't on a BPA doesn't mean it is not appropriate for usage, especially in some niche circumstances. However, Chris is absolutely right. I mean, for some of these larger contracts, the winner, it's going to be sort of a winner takes all. I mean, and that's just sort of an ugly reality. And the other ugly reality is there was an illusion earlier today during some of the initial plenary sessions about enterprise licensing agreements, at least inside the Defense Department. And those are happening. Microsoft has already happened. You're seeing some others happening. And is there a magic list out there of the ones they're going after? The answer to that is yes. Can I tell you what that list is? No, I don't think anyone on this panel will be able to tell you. Do we know what the list is? Yeah, we probably do. But the thing is, we don't know where it is today, and we've been very much told we can't talk about it based on our old jobs. But if you look at where they're spending, the Defense Department is spending the money, just start from the top and move on down, because that's pretty much where it's going to happen. So, I mean, for those who are in that enterprise licensing side, you're going to have to sort of nuggle through that one as well. And for the people who have made traditional money on going there and doing license renewal, I think it's going to be a little bit of a tougher sell in the future. The other part, though, as you start moving into this JIE and the single security architecture, which is the enabler on there, and JRSS as that first instance of the single security architecture, and then the subcomponents of the different communities of interest. So MedCOI, Army COI, Air Force COI, as ways to go there and implement this JRSS stack. For those who are going out and selling stuff, FIPS compliancy actually matters. I think you're seeing that with SOUP. Sorry for those who are in the middle of the protest, but I mean, it's just a reality. But I mean, you need to make sure that you actually conform to some of the standards in there. And once you have that, I think life might be relatively easier, not necessarily easy.
Mm-hmm. Bill, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to comment a little bit. I have a special affection for the JIE. It wasn't originally called the JIE, and I'm actually one of the 4 people that were in the room when we basically conceived the concept. And one of the things about working at DISA and being a vice is that I go to any meeting that Cindy Moran didn't want to go to, so I went to this meeting. And so the 4 people in the room actually were Lieutenant General Pollitt, General Sorensen, Tony Montemorano, and myself. And this was over the coffee table in General Pollitt's living room. Where basically what Pollitt proposed to General Sorensen, who those of you who remember was at that time the G6 of the Army, and what the proposal was that DISA would take over the fiber in Europe. That was the original concept. That was the very first thing that we talked about as being the original. It wasn't called JIE, and I'm escaping right now what the initials were, but our goal at that time was that, Army in Europe, many of you know this, Fifth Signal, for years and years had been managing a fiber system over there. A little bit of it was out of date. It's old Ericsson fiber, and so it didn't really make sense for the Army to do this. And so that's really what the first concept was. And if you think about that, and you're absolutely right, Chris, that it's a concept. And part of concepts are acknowledging a little bit about what's a concept mean? Does that mean it's all laid out in a program? It isn't. So the JIE being a concept, one of the things that when I hear people talk about DISA and what DISA is going to undertake, we have to acknowledge that DISA, in their 4,000 plus people and their 8,000 or so contractors, are not going to get a huge influx of money out of this whole thing, not in today's environment. So who has the money? I mean, as the services have the money. The services are going to continue to do a lot of things. Are we going to bring this under an umbrella? Absolutely. I think that's absolutely going to happen. I think that we're going to see an umbrella of DISA managing additional things, or at least having the enterprise defined, and then things having to work up to the enterprise. But I don't see a lot of data centers going away that are controlled by the Army. I don't see a lot of data centers going away. They're the big ones anyway. I think there's going to be a lot of consolidation into those data centers. I think we're going to see more purple data centers, what we would call purple data centers, that you can use a facility that may be Navy in San Diego, might be Army down at Radford, might be the Marines out in Kansas City. We'll use those facilities and we can put other things into them. By the same token, the JIE concept can extend to industry, and I think that's going to happen too. I think we're going to see that concept continue, but I think that's something that we have to keep in mind.
Yeah, and can I tag on two things? So I think when you think about what Bill just mentioned about this notion of purple data centers and data centers that really have a standardized architecture, standardized enough so that you could, and I'm using a vendor, and so bear with me, but so that you could vMotion something from one data center to the other data center on the fly and be able to do real cost recovery. I think that's sort of that promise and threat that goes along with things like cloud computing, and that goes along as a promise and threat with inside the JIE construct. I mean, there are all sorts of federal acquisition regulation things that have to get rationalized on that. The other part, though, for all of you in the room, I think this idea of what is applications rationalization is one of those unexplored topics. There's all sorts of stuff out there, and when you do a BRAC, you find out all the bright light of disinfecting comes out because someone's got to move it, and the question is, why should I move it, and why does this make sense? And applications rationalization takes time and effort. It's a great place to be when it's all done, but it just takes time.
Very good.
Yeah, if I can close out one thing. One of the challenges, especially within the Department of Defense, too many of enterprise core services, whether it's identification, authentication, storage, computing, what have you, in the early days when IT took off in the 90s, functional stovepipes were created. And they all developed their own identification, authentication. Every complete system was developed in that way. I think the cloud and consolidation can achieve exactly what the department needs. And in the federal government, frankly, if you look at the Department of Defense and VA on shared electronic medical records, if we can get to the point where we are having the functional communities focusing on functional capability and not a set of core services that are a part of every system, service, and application, and they draw those things from the enterprise or from the cloud, that the cost of doing business will be significantly optimized. And that delivery model is, I think, what Bill talks about in terms of the concept behind JIE, is to get away and break down the barriers of sharing, assured information sharing. That's the real nexus of what JIE is. And that's pretty much...
So you talk about cloud obviously being a buzzword. We're starting to see pockets of folks that really understand that it's much more than just cost savings, right? It's about achieving elasticity and flexibility to achieve mission efficiencies and bring down costs while you're doing that as well. It's about 3:04 according to this clock in front of me. I've got a number of other questions that I can run through. I also have some closing remarks that I'd like to go through, but I'd like to pause and see if there might be any questions for the panel from the audience. If there is, I'd like to remind you we need a mic for the video recording. We've got one over here. Kim?
Hello, I'm Scott Ormiston with Affigent. My question is, in today's environment, you have a disparity of security systems. You have, as you commented on, the multiple attack vectors that are available. But as you consolidate, as you standardize and bring these down into a consistent set of tools and resources that are used to protect the network, what becomes the effect of a successful attack when penetrating one attack vector gives you the keys to every other one that's based on that same architecture?
I'll take the first stab at that. One, in my perfect environment, if I were constructing a NetOps, net defense suite, one, as I mentioned earlier, I would spend an inordinate amount of time about defining and understanding what normal look like, both from an internal perspective and an external perspective. Because I'm wasting too much time on trying to figure out what the false positives are in dealing with that, okay? Secondarily, if I can do that, if I can declutter my sensor array to where it's focusing on the true anomalous behaviors, things that we have categorized and defined as something outside of the norm, I can concentrate force and mass on those. Secondarily, but most importantly, I need an intelligence preparation cell that tells me what is the next thing I should be looking for so that I can do tipping and queuing of my sensor array to the next thing that's going to be my blind spot and avoid that blind spot. I think we have the academic, the theoretic, and the engineering rigor in our workforce to be able to do that. It's putting the discipline in the systems engineering and the operational cyber command and control doctrine, whether you're in government or you're in private sector. If I ran my own company, this is exactly what I would design for my sensor array and the way I'd put my crew force together to do that work.
I guess I'll take it as well. So when you think about this conceptual model, which is JIE or the DODIN, or however you characterize this IT environment for the Defense Department, and then again I would posit for the whole of government. Consolidation, standardization gives us a large number of benefits. I mean, we finally get to know what we have. Hopefully we have a standardized change management, configuration management process so we can actually go there and implement changes in a structured way. Mm-hmm. But I think you were right. I mean, when you talk about that and when you have a highly homogeneous environment, I don't want to say you get what you had in Ireland with the potato crop and you get one blight killing, decimating everything. But I mean, I think that analogy, given the fact that I think of these networks and systems as very organic in nature, I think that becomes a problem. The way to resolve some of that, and the way that that single security architecture was designed, was to have slightly different technologies at various planes within inside the environment, so that what you don't have is you don't have the exact same intrusion detection system all the way through the environment. You've got different ones, and as importantly, once you start seeing how attack vectors are coming in, and you start seeing somewhere over here, you've got some tippers coming in and bad actors doing things. What you can do is you can actually start changing and morphing the environment so that you're able to go there and send them in the direction you want them to go. So, I mean, if you start playing again, I do characterize it as a bit of a mental chess game, and sort of that Star Trek-y 3D chess thing. But if you look at it that way, you realize if I know what I know, and I know what normal looks like, I can start identifying the other pieces. And then as they move through the different planes, I can go there and send them the direction I want. But it also premises that as to prevent things like APTs, you actually do define what your super users look like. You don't have super users who have account privileges all over your environment. You actually limit them. And if they start poking in other places, you know that there's another series of problems. And you also are hopefully doing some geotagging so that when Bill is going there and signing in from Iraq, well, we know we might have a bit of a problem. And when Scott is going from a fob out in Afghanistan, we know we might have a problem. And so you've got to have some additional intelligence and smarts built into that system, which does premise understanding it and automation and really a good identity management and configuration management that goes along with it. Does that answer your question?
I believe it.
Okay.
It's something that we all have to be thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah, and based on the way that JIE a single security architecture was constructed, yeah, I mean that stuff was definitely taken into account.
Very good. We have another question up front.
Yes, so Scott,
If you can wait just a second for the mic.
Sure.
Thank you.
So yeah, Ken Wong from CGI. So Scott, you mentioned the application traditionally, like most federal application, is built on the stovepipe, the identity access management, right? And in terms of single security, identity access management is the key security component. Maybe on top of that, there's CDM or the other stuff. There is some federal CI initiative. I don't know.
Yep.
So it's called FICAM. I think you heard of this, Federal Identity Credential Access Management. So how JIE is going to work with the FICAM community to build this single identity access management? So this is question one. Another follow-up question is how JIE is consolidate with the civilian side of CDM program. Okay.
So I'm glad you asked, Ken, the concept about FICAM. I am an absolute believer. I ran the DoD PKI program. It was predicated off of HSPD 12, where all the federal agencies were responsible for implementing a PIV-auth type two-factor hardware-based identification token for every employee. And it was supposed to provide, and it is supposed to provide, universal identification authentication. We all know that the beauty of that beast is in the implementation. And then DoD was a front runner. Several of my predecessors we went to the Common Access Card, and we chose a bit of a different architecture with the credentialing that has come back to pay some negative dividends, I think. But be that as it may, I think that if we can get to that level playing field where an identity credential, hardware token, cryptographically protected, provides the universal interoperability for identification and authentication. The Federal CIO Council, in its wisdom, built the FICAM principally off of the concept of the HSPD 12 directive. And I think if we can get everyone into a plan of action and milestone scheduled deployment along those lines, it would have singularly helped the Department of Defense and the Department of Veterans Affairs on sharing electronic medical records, for example. The federal bridge exists for adjudicating the identity tokens across the federal workspace. And we have industry partners that are out there issuing credentials today. And most notably, the Trans Secure Collaboration Group has standards that have been implemented across the United States, across the defense industry, as well as across their foreign partners in some of the programs that they're doing to cover the ITAR aspects of information sharing and technology. So my belief is in the HSPD 12 and the PIV-auth architecture that's been a significant investment by the government.
Oh, okay. So first of all, remembering that OMB has a brand new senior exec over there, a guy by the name of Grant Schneider, who came from DIA, who's exceptionally well versed in this exact space. And you have a lot of the deputy CIOs or CTOs from the federal departments on a working group to work on that very issue. Also recognize inside the Defense Department that the DISA stuff and most of the other things are actually grabbing its identity management from DMDC, Mary Dixon's organization, which is not part of DISA. And so there is actually one database out there. And it has been offered up as a model for the rest of the whole of government. And there are some people, especially under that whole defense healthcare activity and the VA stuff, as the VA has consolidated processing inside the DISA data centers, who are using and drawing from that with some adjunct fields. So I think that you're starting to see some fascinating movement. But the best person you want to really quiz if you want a lot of great answers is Frank, the Air Force CTO, who is in this building somewhere. Because quite frankly, so to speak, that was a double intentionally a pun. But Frank is one of the subject matter experts in that exact space on identity management in very, very complex systems. I mean, he's done some incredible yeoman's work that has been sucked into that JIE construct. So if you look under the JTSMO and the intellectual capital that the Air Force has brought to the table, I mean, some of that has been very much inside of identity management.
Yep.
So I've got us coming up on the end of our session here. I had originally wanted to walk down the panel for one final thought, but Bill, maybe I'll turn to you on this one, especially given that recent OSD doctrine around cloud computing. I was going to ask for a brief perspective on, based upon your individual experiences, what next year looks like for DISA, for the military services, and for JIE.
Okay. So next year for DISA, right now everybody knows they're going through the reorg. And, my sense that has caused a lot of things to slow down. So the reorganization, which by the way, and I've looked at that, if you haven't looked at it, it's worth getting and looking at it, because I think it's going to take some analysis, and there's a lot to pull off there. But the intent of it is to have an organization that manages the functional requirements, that when the requirements come in for all of the JIE, for cloud, whatever it is, that you've got an organization on Alfred Rivera that's going to design those requirements, that's going to push them out to industry, that's going to create the opportunities that you all are interested in, and then it moves over to the organization under Dave Bennett, which is going to be doing the implementation and the sustainment, and that is a considerable different organizational structure than they've had for the past few years that they had when Henry and I were both there. So it's going to make a lot of difference. So that is going to like any reorganization, I bet everybody in this room has gone through one at some point or other. There's a certain amount of adjustment to a reorganization. JIE, the concept, and one of the things you always have to think about within DoD. Is they sometimes change the initials, they change the words. Forget that. What you got to focus on is what they're actually trying to do. And ultimately, the JIE concept is really what we described. It's creating a platform out there that you can bring things together in a way that saves money. Simplistically, JIE is really just about saving money. Ultimately, that's what we're going to have to think about with the JIE. I think it's going to be a long road. It is not going to happen quickly. I think it's going to go well beyond 2015. But I think that's going to be their big focus, is organizing to maintain the new organization structure. Hopefully, the new director comes in, which will be most likely next summer, and has that same concept. Doesn't try to change it. And if that can go forward, I think they've got a better structure. And then the next level is to continue the work with the services. For people agreeing on the same concept. Most of you know that the Navy's a little bit outside of that. So Army and Air Force right now, for all practical purposes, are the one that are going to drive forward the JIE concept. I think we've got buy-in. I think from the senior level leadership of the services, I think you've got buy-in from that. A lot of it's because it makes sense, and I think that's going to be the big focus.
Very good. Well, I'd like to close here just very quickly saying thanks again to everybody that attended the session. I hope to see many of you in the networking session this afternoon. I believe it begins at 4:30. And if we could give our audience, or I'm sorry, our panel a round of applause, I'd like to thank you guys again.
I'm fine with giving them one.
Thanks.
Hey, Regis, how you doing?